there are no questions, of course we can immediately. But if you insist, we will take a few. Eric.
Thank you, Professor Hoppe. Concerning your riddle, a few people asked them a question. I would like your opinion on one point, meaning it seems to me that in case of very important security concerns, people, when they have a choice between liberty and security, will choose security and do not put the same price on liberty and security, and will choose, in that case, to have some guy saying, and I
don't think they will sign an agreement. I will, for once and all, never to be revoked at any time. Delegate my freedom to you, and you will decide in every situation who is right and wrong. They will always have some sort of escape clause. You'll say, okay, for the time being, because the situation happens to be such and such, I'm not willing to grant you the authority to make some decisions on my behalf. But you will have difficulties finding people who say, once and for all, I can never get out of this. You will always decide who is right and who is wrong. In any case of conflict, even if I hit you on the head myself, I decide then, was I permitted to do that or not? Because every moron knows that this is a rather dangerous agreement that he would sign on. Christian?
Thank you very much. I thought it was a very interesting talk, and both of your talks were quite enlightening. There is one point, however, that I would like to explore. In the contract that you just reminded, I love my liberty irrevocably, and you will educate, you state on all matters concerning my life, even when it concerns our relationship as well. But isn't there a third party that is not identified, which is not identified as a separate entity, which is the kind of liberal tradition that has emerged over centuries, which limits the power of the state over individuals, in the sense that there are things that are generally accepted, can't be done. Like, you cannot reinstate slavery. You cannot reinstate torture in criminal proceedings. You cannot reinstate the kind of apartheid between various categories of citizens and so on. So isn't this ideology permeating society and the kind of defense? I'm playing devil's advocate, but I would like to hear your answer to this.
But that only makes the same point that I did make in my paper also, that is, agreements can be self-binding. In that case, you rely, in fact, on this tradition to act as a restraint on both parties. But this restraint is, of course, not some external party. It is an internal restraint that you have. So rules can be self-enforced without having an external party doing it in all cases. Paul?
Yes, I would like to raise a question. I mean, this is, yes, I use the microphone. This is not a position that either one of us would be particularly sympathetic to, but it's one that I encounter all the time. Namely that most people, certainly in the United States, love their government. And it's a democratic government, a liberal democratic government. Their major complaint is it doesn't provide enough social programs. People from all over the world are eager to come to the United States to enjoy these social democratic advantages. And here you are rising there to this podium and belittling this government, which is a joy to so many people. And in fact, a joy to people who are, flooding across our borders illegally to be in the United States to enjoy the advantages of this government. Who are you to complain about a government which is so enormously popular and which enjoys not only tacit consent but enormous enthusiastic support from our population. And you're just a kind of carving intellectual who does not accept a situation that for most people was absolutely delightful. How would you respond to this question?
First of all, recall, I did say that government, as it exists, rests on consent. That is, people by and large, of course, seem to accept the proposition that government is necessary, voluntarily submit to its rule. Most people do so because they have already thought deeply about the matter. And when it comes to the question, why do we go to the United States? The answer is no way quite simple. Even if you recognize that it is a group of robbers and plunderers, you have to make comparisons whether the robbers and plunderers are nicer and whether are less nice. The example I always give, I had a friend who went to an ATM machine and that there were a few €100 out the ATM machine. At the moment, he got to see somebody who stood behind him with a knife and robbed him, and then he started negotiating with the robber and said, I was planning to go out and have a beer. Now you just robbed me of this opportunity entirely. Here at least give me a little bit. And he gave €20 back. And he had his beer. Now, what can also happen, of course, is that once you start these negotiations, that the guy will then keep your teeth up on top. And the difference is, let's say, between the United States government and the foreign government in Russia is the United States government is like the robber who negotiate a little bit and he lets you have his beer, whereas the Soviet Union government was they keep your teeth up after you have the thousand and enough to start negotiating. So that's the explanation why they come to the United States.
One additional upon the argument giving, not having, just giving, it seems to rely on a very question of precedent is that it's wrong, or at least something to be said against, criticizing something that makes a lot of people happy, and people can make happy and all sorts of very bad things, and what would be the promulgation reason is probably criticizing some institution that makes a sad and people happy. It seems
I mean, welfare is as
worked in
the Daniel's speech, that they are quite happy about the fact that they get all these handouts. Should they be happy?
Well, in terms of government is enormously popular. If you look at the way things go, they typically go in the direction of political parties favoring expansion of social programs.
I understand your argument that if that's true, that if people are very happy, I say, like the state expanded, does that give a reason to avoid criticizing it? Is that a reason? Is that an argument against the material? I'm not seeing why that is the case at all. I suppose it's true that a lot of people want to expand the state. Why is that any reason at all to think that the ethical arguments of the material defense have something wrong?
Let me make one more point. Obviously, it's a contradiction between the way you perceive the government and the way I perceive the government, because I generally agree with what it says, and the way most people perceive the government, which shows why it's so difficult to argue against it.
Well, yes, I think that's entirely right. I think that's their problem.
It's your problem.
How would you categorize, classify churches in front of state? Churches, not churches. Would it be states, pseudo states, or something different? What's the criterion that the churches from states?
First of all, the churches do not impose tax on people. And you can simply say, I quit the church, and I'm no longer a member of the church. I no longer submit myself to whatever the internal jurisdictions that the church has over the lives of people.
Professor Hoppe, what would you respond to a little more sophisticated argument regarding the provision of public goods that people create and want the state to solve the coordination problem to provide the more optimal allocation of resources between public and private goods, and therefore increase the utility of all the members of the state? So it's not a scarcity, but a problem of coordination.
The costs of coordination are one of many costs. And the task of entrepreneurs is to find ways how to reduce costs, including transaction costs. There's nothing special about transaction costs. So what if it's difficult that certain people make a deal? But they just won't make it. It's obviously too costly for them to do it. And other things are more important for them than overcoming these costs. There's nothing special about transaction costs.
Just one note, it's a very good point on this, that there usually isn't a single point that solves coordination on usually multiple solutions. They still have a problem with, say, which one the coordination solution is to put in, so it really doesn't, they say it really doesn't solve the problem, it just sort of is the problem that the common occurs is sort of something different, and you have to decide on all the coordination delivery. There's also something you have.
Because things overcome the problem of transaction costs. So you don't agree to something that they propose for you, and you can say the agreement does not happen because somehow transaction costs seem to be so high. And what does the state then do? It takes out a revolver and says, now you do what I'm telling you to do, and transaction costs have been miraculously brought to zero. For which
Could I take up this observation about the role of the church? First Hoppe said, I think rightly, that rulers have always established agencies to control the population and prevent them from rebelling. Prevent them from rebelling. And instance in particular, the employment of thugs, by which I presume you have the police ability to do this. And secondly, education to instill the state in the young. And I think throughout the history of most states, rulers have also used priests as an agency of social control, as we call it in sociology. The role of priests has been to tell the citizens that they obey law, then they will be rewarded in the afterlife in heaven, and if they disobey law, they will be punished in the afterlife in hell. And that's been an important agency of social control. It's a curious phenomenon of our times, over the last half century or so. The church has renounced this role. And perhaps we should not be surprised that concomitantly with that, crime has risen as a population no longer fear punishment in the afterlife.
I entirely agree. Originally, these educational roles, which I thought was role of intellectual work, was fulfilled by priests and similar people. And gradually, these originally independent institutions have become dominated increasingly by the state. The church and the state have formed alliances. All the churches in the meantime are semi-state institutions in the Protestant countries. That is quite obviously the case. The state collects taxes for them that is remitted to the churches. In other countries, it is somewhat more indirectly done. But I entirely agree with your point that the churches usually fulfill precisely this task. The churches have, for instance, also largely cooperated in governments taking over the educational system, relieving them of the obligation to fund their own private religious schools and subsidizing schools that nominally remain denominational schools. So there's a certain complicity, of course, between churches and state.
Adam Ferguson and Hegel, he came up with a civil society thing. And civil society is all about shrinking. If you will look at it, the size of the state is growing almost everywhere. But what do you think? What will happen in would the state be an absolute monopoly? Because now it looks like, say, the United States state is effectively nationalizing civil society. All these non-profits, all these religious initiatives, and whatever, they all follow be funded by now.
I think that's one of the great insights of the sociologist Robert Nisbet, who explained that initially we have all sorts of intermediate institutions. You have family churches, you have professional organizations, city charters, and so forth, and people are protected in a certain way by all of these organizations of which they are members. But all of these intermediate organizations are, of course, a threat to the ambitions of being the sole ultimate monopolist decider in any case of conflict. So what all states have done is undermining and ultimately trying to destroy the influence that these intermediate mediating institutions originally had in order to protect the lives of people and the property of people. Churches have reduced in significance. Families are gradually being destroyed. The increasingly intervene in affairs that were initially considered to be completely family affairs. Maybe to take just one example, this discusses it quite convincingly. Questions such as should abortions be allowed or not allowed were considered to be private family affairs. There might have been consultations among fathers, mothers, grandmothers, and so forth, and a solution to this problem was found. In the meantime, of course, this is considered to be an issue of public policy. It's no longer respected that this is something that families decide internally. So the importance of families is completely reduced on the way out. The do-goods, for instance, take advantage of certain tragedies that happen, which will always happen as long as mankind is what it is. Father leads his child to death, or mother neglects the child in order to send police forces to houses and confiscate children from families. We have seen that recently in Texas, where the United States government has confiscated hundreds of children, from 400 children, to be taken away because of some alleged problems that have occurred in these families. And the same is any type of other organization that competes to some extent more or less with the ultimate power of the state to regulate and rule over the life of people. And maybe one additional note. Frequently now people make a point, we want to promote civil society again. And they say civil society is something good and the state is something bad. Now I agree that the state is something bad, but we should be very skeptical about these civil society projects that exist. They're mostly run by some so-called NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and as Tony Lorenzo has pointed out, many of these NGOs are government-funded organizations that have no other purpose than to lobby the government, give them more money, a spiral of pretending that something outside of government, activities outside of government are taking place in order to lobby government to actually expand its range of power over people. Floyd.
Hans, the movement, the revolution with Ron Paul is not a new Ron Paulian message. For 30 years, he has consistently been what we would all call a strict constructionist of the Constitution. Until your own work, Democracy, the God That Failed, I too was a strict constructionist. Are you and Ron Paul at odds over outcomes? And would you prefer to advise him?
Yeah, I think, of course, fundamentally Ron Paul is, of course, wrong. I mean, he errs on fundamental theoretical issues. That doesn't mean that I don't consider him a good man, a man that should be supported with all of my heart. But when it comes to his standing, so to speak, as a theoretician or as a deep thinker, I would say I cannot quite take that statement seriously. I do not agree with him on fundamental issues. He does not realize, or doesn't seem to realize, that it is not an accident that the Constitution, as it was written up, has ultimately led to the present result. Because if you have a Supreme Court that determines, again, what is constitutional and what is not constitutional. And the Supreme Court itself is part of the governmental apparatus, and any increase in powers acquired by the state mean also an increase in powers as far as the range of jurisdiction is concerned of the Supreme Court itself. Then this is not an accident, so to speak. That could have been predicted from the outset, because the machine, so to speak, that was set up is flawed. If you set up a constitution that does allow taxation, you set up a constitution that does allow legislation, then this is what in the long run you will get. And that happened in practically every country the same way. It happened in Switzerland, is happening in Switzerland. Yes, traditions, convictions of the general public might slow this down to a certain extent, but this setup of an institutional framework will necessarily bring about these results. And Ron Paul does not, as far as I can see, recognize that simply insisting on the Constitution will ever solve the problem that he wants to solve. But as I said, of course, I'm all on his side. Wish him well. I love him very much.
And a question for Dr. Gordon. I understand the argument, and very much agree with it, that the monopoly security provider is essentially different from a tax levying state. However, how would you respond to the argument that it is conceivable, or at least not excluded, that a monopolist security provider, because he is the monopolist, could on its own transform the contractual agreement into a mandatory requirement to subscribe to the security provision services, which would be, as a matter of fact, equal to transforming itself into a state.
But you see, that is certainly would be a big danger if you had such a, would be a big danger if you had such a monopoly agency. That wouldn't be a good objection to NOSI, because NOSI put in explicitly as a requirement that almost everyone follows standard unitary use rights. There are no rights violations. So what NOSI is trying to do is say he wants to try to show that you get a state-like entity, no one violating rights, right? The data arises that way. That each one look at sovereignty. Each trial to certain rights. So may apply that directly on those. Or it knows it could probably say in these characteristic languages that that's orthogonal or orthogonal is hard.
Okay, in that case, I'll thank you all, and I'll see you.